So these little guys first, and we're going to work on the red on these, and then the red on the, then we'll work on the red on the hot chocolate. Then we'll work on the red on the pudding, and then we'll work on the red on here. And by the time we've worked on all of the red, we should be able to go back here without having to go to the hairdryer and start on the body of the little guys. So mix yourself up some nice bright cadmium red, or if you don't have cadmium red, maybe a scarlet color, you know, a bright, nice bright red from your Pyrrole red is nice and bright from your collection of paints. Let's maybe zoom in just a little bit. This happy little guy. I did this one first with the candy cane. That was my thought. And then I tried this one, and I kind of like the little hat on him. So, but I mean, you can also put a candy cane in his arm if you want to. It's totally up to you. But when I was redrawing, I thought I'll do the one with the little hat. And I also, I used my pen with waterproof ink. This is my Platinum Preppy. It's a very cheap little pen. And I put carbon ink in it because it's completely waterproof. And I prefer this pen for drawing on watercolor paper because this is cold pressed and it's fairly rough. And it wears out the nibs of the pens really, really quickly. And they kind of skip a little bit. But this little Platinum Preppy pen is great, and it doesn't wear out, and I can just keep, you know, putting carbon ink cartridges in, and you can get them in different nib sizes. So I bought a 03 because that's kind of what I use most of the time, but you can buy them bigger and smaller. Also, you could use you know, micron pen. This is a 02. You could use a stapler pen. This is 05. They're all good. They're all waterproof. This one's just a little bit thicker. And these ones, I like the micron pens on regular paper, but I find on watercolor paper, they dry up and wear out. You can see this one really quickly. So I've kind of given up with them. I like the stapler ones. They're much more expensive than the other ones, but they last about 3 times as long. And now I love this little guy. I'm gonna order some more in different sizes because it's perfect for watercolor. So that's what I've done. You don't have to do it first if you don't want to. You can do the outline last. You don't have to outline if you don't like outline. That's fine too. Whatever suits you. So you know, you do what you want to. So let's get some red mixed up. And we don't want very big paintbrushes because we don't have very much area to paint. So a size 4 is pretty good. I'm going to grab my size 4 if I can find it. There we go. I'm not going to mix with my size 4 because I don't want to wear it out. And Carrie's just bought new silver black velvet brushes, so it's a good idea to find one of your cheaper brushes to mix your colors so you don't wear your beautiful brushes out. And I'm just going to mix up a little bit of cadmium red, nice and strong. We're only going to do 1 layer for most of these things, so you want to start with a pretty strong mix. Grab my tray. So not too much water and a good amount of pigment. Get my good pen, my good brush. Rolling my brush in that paint, and then I'm going to be very, very careful. Maybe I can zoom in even a little bit more. There we go. You have to make sure that your paint is wet enough to flow from your brush, but pigmented enough that you've got a nice strong color, because we're just going to do 1 layer. And if you want to get in these little areas like this, you lift the brush up and use the point. And then if you want to do a bigger area with more paint quickly, you push your brush down a little bit and use more of the brush. Don't push it down so far. I've seen people push it down so far that the metal furrow hits the paper. You're going to damage your paper that way. It doesn't go down that far, but it goes down far enough that you can get a good amount of paint on. And then when you come around to these little bits here, lift it up again and use just the point of that brush. Now the lovely thing about these silver black velvet brushes, and I don't get any money from the company or free brushes or anything, but I love them. They keep a point for years and years and years. The bad thing about them is they are made from black squirrel and a synthetic polyester. So if you don't like animals being harvested for their fur, it's not the choice for you. I'd choose one of the other brushes that are Princeton, or trying to think of some of the other good ones, but there's some good ones out there. Right, now I'm going to make his cheeks sort of pink, so all I'm going to do for that is dilute my red a little bit. I mean, you could use rose if you wanted to. There's just no sense getting that much rose out right now. So I've diluted that out with some water, so it's a little bit more pink for his cheeks. And they're just a little bit lighter than in hat. Now, what I was just saying to Carolyn was, if you have alizarin crimson or a dark red, like a crimson red, you can use a little bit of that while this is still wet. I get my words mixed up. That's the trouble when you're painting, your talking brain doesn't work too well. So I'm getting a little bit of that alizarin crimson, that slightly darker red. I'm just putting a little bit of shadow right here into the wet paint. If your paint's dried up too much, you can always put that on later. I'm going to switch to my zero brush because I want to do the little buttons on his chest, and make sure I get nice strong cadmium red on that brush. And you can either paint it completely flat, or you can leave a tiny little bit of white paper showing, so they look like they're like Smarties or something, or a candy of some kind, and that they have a shiny exterior. So again, if you just lift your brush up a little bit and paint with the tip, you can control your brush and your paint. So there we go. We've got the red hat, the buttons, and the little bit of cheeks. Also, I left a little bit of space in his smile. You can either have I'm going to leave it white this time. If you have the one with the candy cane, if you've done that one, I didn't draw that one, but this is the time, I'll pop this one here though that I have done. This is the time to use again your number 2 brush or a small brush and paint in the red stripes on the candy cane. And what I've done is I've added a little bit of extra stripe. I've put a thin stripe here. I looked at a few pictures of candy canes, and a lot of them had just not the thick stripe, they had a few other stripes. So I thought it looked better with a little bit more on, so I popped some more in. Again, it's your choice. And this one has the buttons, and I left a little bit of white showing in the bow. I filled in the eyes with the black pen because that's so much easier on something this small. And you don't have to do all this splatter either. I just decided to go a little bit wild with that one, and this one I kept fairly plain. I think I like it plain. But I'm going to make several of them, so they'll all be a little bit different. So once we've finished this little guy with the red, we will move on to the hot chocolate and just put that to one side to dry. It'll dry pretty quickly. We were working on dry paper, so we want to bring this one over and work on all of the red parts on this one too. And I think always starting, for me, right-handed, starting up here in the left-hand corner and working across so that I don't smudge anything with my hand. And again, I will start this candy cane, get my cadmium red, a little bit more, just make a little bit more paint. I've got lots of I've got my zero brush in my hand. My 0 and my 2 are not that different in size, really. I struggled, well, I didn't struggle. I used the 2 for a long time, and then I bought a 0, but There's not a lot of difference. And let's see, I would like the red to start near the cream here, so I'll work backwards, and I'll probably put the extra stripe on this too. You have to be really careful with this because it's a very, very tiny area, and you need your paint wet enough that it flows. I went with very sort of generic Christmas designs with these. I didn't use a photo. Well, I looked up photos and things of how Christmas cards go, and I'm not usually this generic, but I thought it would just be fun. I liked the idea of the gingerbread people, and I really liked the idea of the hot chocolate. So just felt cheerful and comforting. There, so now I'm going to do that thing of putting in the extra stripe. Remember to curve it a little bit around the curve. Yeah. And then I think this little heart in the jam, it's supposed to be like a little jam center for this little shortbread cookie. And I'm looking for my, I've got my pictures here so I don't get lost, don't forget anything. Yeah, so I think that's all the red on that one. When you put them to one side, don't put them on top of each other because you will get wet paint on the back one and smudge the top one. I'm very prone to doing things like that. Not thinking about where I'm putting things. So let's put this one somewhere safe. Very much on the Christmas pudding that's red, there's just some berries. And again, when you're painting the berry, you can, if you want, if you're able, you can leave a little white space for a highlight on the berry. If you find that's too difficult, you can put it on later with Dr. P.H. Martin's white. If it doesn't happen on all of them, don't worry. One thing it does help you with, a good practice, is it helps you with brush control. If you actually, you know, keep practicing this on each little one and on each berry and on each one, pretty soon you'll get quite good at leaving a little bit of white paper. Much easier on dry paper too. So we want to get these little berries in. And you can either have them this lovely, just flat cadmium red, or just like the Santa hat, you can add a little bit of alizarin crimson to darken the underside up, or some of the rear ones up. When I'm finished, I'm going to use my pen to just maybe put a little bit of shading on, or texture. We've got those little highlights. And grab a little bit of alizarin crimson, which is in my other tray. Oh, here it is, right in front of me. My other paint tray. And while this is still wet, I'm just going to touch a little bit of alizarin to the bottom of these berries. Just to add a tiny bit of shading. And I don't know if I like the corners. I kind of like something in the corner, but I don't know if I like what I did. What I do have is I have my tape very evenly stuck along the edge. So anything I do put in the corner is going to have a lovely straight edge to it. So if you, I'm going to do it again, even though I wasn't that fond of it. If you do want something in the corners, I'm going to turn it so I can know that as you paint the corner, your tape's going to keep it lovely and straight on one side. So I'm gonna do those sort of like curved, sort of like a curved edge in the corner there. And to echo the berries, rather than what I did last time, to echo the berries, I think I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, you know, big, medium, small coming out from the corner. You don't have to do this, I'm just explaining kind of how I did that. Now I like to turn it so that I can actually work with the way my hand goes naturally for that curve. And then just the tip of my very small brush, 1, 2, 3, and turn it again. Now, because I'm addicted to brushes, and I have hundreds of them, I have this little dotting brush. It's quite interesting. This one's made by Princeton. It's a 10/0, and it's angled so that you can put the dot down and not have your hand like in the way when you're doing the dot. I'm going to try that one out just for play. Not water on that. I'm not measuring these bits, and I probably should have. And if you like things to be precise and not a bit random like mine, you can you know, measure how far out you're coming. I'm going to try this little dot brush. Oh, it's specifically good for making dots, this little brush, and so you can see what you're doing. Works really well. A nice thing is it's a little bit stiffer too than the silver black velvet brushes, so a little bit firmer for working on things like that. And last corner. Whatever, curved line. And my dotting brush. If you don't have one, just use the tip of your brush. But I have that brush sitting there doing nothing, so let's give it a good use. Right, so that's your Christmas pudding. Again, put that to one side so that the red all dries. And like I say, don't worry about this edge, because I'm not, I mean, you wouldn't take the tape off now, but once I take the tape off, that edge is going to be perfectly straight, so that won't look as messy. Okay, so you know how it goes. The berries are all pretty similar. Try and get a little bit of highlight on them if you can. These ones are going to be a little bit easier because they're a little bit bigger, she says, and then probably doesn't get much of a highlight on them. Also, you don't really have to worry about one running into the other with these. They're all just red berries. Not too difficult. And last one. And when these are dry, if you did want to put a little bit of darker alizarin crimson shadow on the underneath of that one, you can. I'd wait till this one's dry so that it's distinct. Yeah, so that's all we need for that one. Just 3 little berries. And then we'll go back to, once that one is done, we'll go back to the little gingerbread guy. So many of the techniques for all of these 4 cards are the same colors, same techniques, and that's why they will go well together in a group. So for the gingerbread person, we're going to work wet and wet with raw sienna and burnt sienna. So we need to make a mix up. I was just doing that while I was waiting. I made a little puddle of raw sienna and a little puddle of burnt sienna, just so I had it ready. And again, I'm going to use my number 4 and my number 2 brush. I'm going to start with, of course, the lighter one, which is the raw sienna. Mine's dried up while I've been waiting. So we're going to and work slowly, work slowly so that you can go around the hat and the eyes and everything carefully. That's another reason why your paint needs to be fairly wet, because you need to have enough time to get the paint on these areas. And this is my raw sienna. Now, if you don't have raw sienna, use yellow ochre. It needs to be one of those earth yellows. I like raw sienna because it's a little bit more transparent. Yes, we are going to work wet in wet, but
not yet.
The paper's dry. We're going to work
Gotcha now.
Wet paint into wet paint.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I'll put this wet raw sienna on. Now I need to do a bit of work before I get much further. What I wanted to do is be careful around the cheeks and mouth and eyes and so forth. But if I go too much further, it's going to be too dry to do the wet in wet. So I'm going to work with 2 paintbrushes. I grab my number 2 and some burnt sienna now. This is raw sienna. And this is where the wet in wet comes in. I'm going to put the burnt sienna around the edges and let it flood into the raw sienna. So we look like baking looks, like, it's a little bit more baked sometimes around the edges and a little bit lighter in the middle. Now, I've wiped, you can't see what I'm doing, so I'll show you. I've wiped my brush on my towel so it's thirsty, and I'm going to use that thirsty brush to just soften these edges where it's meeting. And I had to stop and do that before the raw sienna dried too much. So now I'm going back to the raw sienna with my number 4 brush, and I can move on a little bit and try and get the body in. Now the ends of the feet and the arms, you're not going to worry about those so much. You could even do them first if you wanted to practice this, because they're separated by the icing. So I'm going to try and get the body in. The way to keep your paint wet is to keep dipping your brush in the paint so that you're never working with a dry brush. You're always working with a brush that's loaded with wet paint. See, 3 or 4 strokes, and then I'm dipping again in my wet paint. Your paint should look wet and shiny all the time you're working. And if it's just the right consistency, it will be perfect when you come back to do the burnt sienna. It'll have had time to sink in a little bit. So I'm going to get all the way around to the edge of the icing with the raw sienna. And then I'm going to go to my other brush and grab my burnt sienna, which is not too watery. You don't want it too watery, otherwise it will flood and make runbacks. So we want it just a good consistency. And then I'm just touching with the tip of my brush around the edges and letting that paint flow in. And as I come up through the stomach area, I'm putting a bit more in so that he looks a little bit rounded. And of course, gingerbread is quite dark. We're emphasizing the lighter colors here. We don't want to go dark brown. It's not as attractive. You can, I mean, if you want to go dark brown, you can. I just think this looks a little bit more colorful, a bit more attractive. Now, the head of my gingerbread person is still quite wet, so I'm going to go in and put a little bit more A little bit more burnt sienna in there. Get him a little bit more, put him back in the oven. He's going to be a little bit more baked. And I'm going to show you my burnt sienna mix. It's not as watery as my raw sienna mix. That way it's not going to be too wet when I put it on. Now I'm going to dot lightly with the tip of my number 2 brush to put some texture in his body. Grab a bit more burnt sienna that's not very wet and put a little bit of shadow. Now I know it looks fairly flat when you look at the picture, sort of just one colorish, but it's not. It requires a little bit of work and a little bit of detail to get this sort of lovely two-colored baked gingerbread person. You see, the burnt sienna I'm putting in now is I'm trying to get the color balance right here, is much thicker paint so that it doesn't run all over the place. I can keep it where it should be. One light, the camera light, is compensating for the other light. I'm trying to get it. It's looking a little bit more reddy brown on the camera than it is. So and even though I'm adjusting the light to the blue light, then the camera readjusts it back. So you know, not quite as reddy brown as mine. It's overcompensating. Right, so now we've got to do the little hands and the feet, and that's exactly the same technique, but you can do it, you know, one at a time. One brush for the raw sienna, and I'm actually not going to do the hands one at a time because I want this paint to soak in a little bit before I come back with the burnt sienna. I'm going to do the other one. And then come back with my not so wet burnt sienna. And I do actually, it is very shiny. So I am actually just going to just test it. Still a little bit wet. If you like a much more brown gingerbread, you can use burnt umber, which is, let's just come back. Bring my tray over. So here is the burnt sienna right there. And next to it's the burnt umber, which is a little bit more, oh, sorry, you can't see that. Hang on, let's turn it around. There. So next to my burnt sienna is burnt umber. So that it's a darker brown. So if you want your gingerbread to be more brown and darker, I just pop some burnt umber on here so you can see the difference. You can make it browner by using the burnt umber. If you don't have a burnt umber, then you can mix burnt sienna and ultramarine blue to make a burnt umber color. Which is what I usually do. And the reason being, most burnt umbers dry up more than other paints. They really dry very quickly and kind of crack, and I just don't like the dry texture of them. But I just recently bought M. Graham's burnt umber to try it out, because M. Graham mixes their paints with honey, so they don't dry out, they stay very sticky. And so far the burnt umber has stayed nice and moist, so I'm quite liking it. So, but to make one, same old mix, I always use burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and you get something so close to burnt umber that I've never bothered to buy both colors. I just tried it out for an experiment. find the correct brush to use and go back to my burnt sienna. And I know that Diana asked me last week why her burnt sienna wasn't the same as mine, and that's because companies make them with different formulas, and some companies use pigment brown 7 for burnt sienna, which I don't like. It's too, I find it too thick, too brown. And other companies, the one I like, use pigment red 101, and that's the one I like. So I buy those ones. And on the little hands, and let's do the little feet. And sometimes if the burnt sienna isn't that one in a brand, like Daniel Smith does the pigment brown 7, so I don't like their burnt sienna, but then they do iron oxide brown, which is pigment red 101. So you just buy the iron oxide brown instead of the burnt sienna, you get the correct pigment. All right, let's do the little feet, small brush. And the other one. And you can also use both colors in the gingerbread person. You can use the burnt sienna, and then you can go in with some darker burnt umber or your mix, and put the darker one on afterwards if you want some brown. So again, around the edges, and especially next to the white icing, it's kind of nice to darken that up so it really shows up. And I'm going to grab a little bit of that dark brown that I just made. Maybe put a little bit on here. This is still fairly wet here. I can still put a little bit of dark brown there. Not too much. I don't want it to be too dark. I'm going to blend that in with my thirsty brush. I have to tell you, on my screen, it's looking a lot more red than brown. That's mine starting to dry, and I'm just waiting for you. I'm just playing with the texture, putting a little bit more sort of little dotty texture on to make it look like gingerbread baking. Probably overdoing it. It's often not a good idea to play too long. I'm going just a little bit darker near his hat. Around the edge of his head. Okay, how are we doing? Doing okay? We're nearly ready for a little bit more on one of the other ones. We don't have very much brown to do on the mug. Pretty straightforward. The cinnamon sticks are going to have 2 layers. The first layer will be just burnt sienna. We're going to put a little bit of dark, either burnt umber or a burnt sienna mix on afterwards. But first of all, just going to use the burnt sienna to put in the cinnamon sticks. And if you want to highlight, it's much easier to put the color in flat, wash and dry your brush, and then if you want to highlight, you can just drag your dry, thirsty brush down one side of the stick, same side for both of them, of course, and you can put a little highlight. Now we're going to put a shadow on the other side when this is dry. If we were working on a much bigger picture, bigger sticks, you could put the shadow on now wet in wet, but these are way too small to do that. Now I'm going to go to my zero brush because there's a little star anise down here, and again I'm going to put burnt sienna on that first and then some darker color later. I put that in there because I wanted to put marshmallows in, and they didn't really show up without some kind of dark paint, and I wanted to reflect or use the burnt sienna again somewhere, and that just seemed to be the perfect thing to put in there. I wasn't sure how to draw one, so I looked up photos, and it's pretty simple. It's a cross like that way and then a diagonal cross that way with a dot in the middle. It's not very hard to draw. So that's just done with the burnt sienna. It looks darker because I have the black lines quite close to each other on there. And then the cookie is just like the gingerbread cookie, except lighter. It's not going to be as dark. So it's mostly raw sienna then, with just a tiny, tiny touch of burnt sienna just for some baked look to the corners. So you want your small brush and your raw sienna. And of course your red should be perfectly dry by now. That's just been sitting there and it should have dried up. Don't make your raw sienna too dark. It's just a little shortbread cookie, so lots of water with your raw sienna. And then just wait a minute, just let it soak in a little bit. Otherwise, when you put your burnt sienna on it, it's just going to cover all of your raw sienna. So you just need to wait a little bit. And while you're waiting, you can put, now you're going to have to see my raw sienna is quite diluted. For the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to have to dilute it out even more until it's almost water, because I'm going to use it in two places. I'm going to use it on a little bit of the marshmallow, for a little tiny bit of shading, warm shading. We're going to put some grey on there too, but first just a little bit of warm shading on the marshmallow, just on the top right hand side, on the bottom of this one, just in there. And the other place we're going to use it, I'm going to switch to my number 4 brush. I'm going to use it on the cream. So sort of coming around here, we're going to do a little bit of shading on the cream when it's near the cup, the mug. A little bit here. Go in the direction of the cream, just like if you were doing the log or the tree, so that you have some sort of swirly look to it. And leave a lot of it white. And by the time you've done that, by the time you've done your marshmallows and your cream with a little bit of diluted raw sienna, your cookie should be drying up, and you can come back with a little bit of burnt sienna and your number 0 or very small brush, and you can put a little bit of burnt sienna on the side and a little tiny bit around this edge, and just work it in. A clean brush, dry brush, just work it in with a clean damp brush so that you've got mostly raw sienna on that cookie, with just a little bit of the burnt sienna looking like, you know, the baked edges. You can do a little bit of dotting too. Just taking it and just dotting a little bit. Keep it nice and light though. You don't want to overdo the color. And then we'll let that dry, because when we've done all the rest of the color on the other ones. We'll come back, we'll do the color of the mug. Now, I looked at lots of pictures of mugs and I kind of liked the blue mug that I saw. You don't have to do a blue mug. You can do a green mug, you can do a red mug, you can do an ultramarine blue mug, you can, whatever mug color you like, you can do. I just happened to see a photo of a mug this color and I really liked it. I liked it for two reasons. I just like the color, and it really is a lovely complementary color to the browns and the raw siennas. It's the complementary blue to the raw sienna, so that kind of works really well and gives a bit of a break. All of our pictures are all sort of raw sienna and burnt sienna and red, so it just gives a little bit of a break to them, makes them a little bit different. See, but you choose your mug color, whatever you like for your mug. One of the last things we'll do is put a little bit of shading under it, so that will come much, much later. We need the shading so that the marshmallows look white or brighter, and just because it looks a little less like the mug's floating in space. While I'm here, and because that burnt sienna has dried, I'm going to put on the other side, this is my burnt sienna ultramarine blue mix. So I'm going to put that on the left hand side and the tops. And then with my thirsty damp brush, I'm just going to agitate that so it's a little bit of a soft edge to make them look a little bit round. So again, if you have burnt umber, or if you have a dark brown already in your, see, this is, I'm just putting now the burnt umber on. It's even darker a little bit than my mix, so just darkening it close to the cream. You can just use a dark brown from your paint tray, whatever you have. I used to use sepia quite a bit because it's a nice dark brown. And if your star anise has dried a little bit light, you can add a little bit of dark brown to that too, just a tiny bit in the center. Maybe I should put them side by side, hey? Well, we can try that. I'm trying to get them in a good position. There we go. That looks okay, I think. Another thing you could do, if you love playing with detail, is you could put some sprinkles on top of the cream. If that's something you love to do. I just thought about it. I thought about the Tim Hortons advert for their white chocolate, their Christmas white chocolate, and they have candy cane sprinkles on the top. Just wondering what that would look like. Maybe I'll try some on the one that I've already done. I'm going to, I've got a little bit of the cadmium red on my tiny zero brush. And I'm just going to put some, I think I'm going to put some red and green sprinkles on the top of this one. And you don't have to do this. This was just a thought that came to me as I was sitting here. I'm going to grab a little bit of probably a phthalo green, just maybe do some red and green sprinkles. Phthalo green's nice and bright, very Christmassy. It doesn't have to be a natural green. It's, you know, it's food dye green. So one with, one without. So for the Christmas pudding, again, we're going to use the raw sienna and the burnt sienna and the darker mix that's either burnt umber or your burnt sienna and ultramarine blue mix. So we need to have those ready because, again, we're going to work on dry paper but wet in wet, so that we can get this sort of highlight and we can get the darker pudding, and then we can get the darker mix. And these are meant to be, you know, raisins and stuff in there, these blobs. Let's put that where I can see it. So I need a little bit more paint because I've used a lot. So I need some, pull back a little bit. I need some raw sienna, a bit more. I'm gonna need a lot of raw sienna for the pies, so I can make up a lot ready for when I do the pies. I'm using a bit of my raw sienna light and a bit of my regular raw sienna. I've really grown to love the light and the burnt sienna. And then I'm definitely going to use the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue mix because I can control the darkness of that, and I want to go quite dark for the raisins and the shadows. So over here I'm mixing the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna to make a really nice dark brown for the raisins and shadows. So I have those three ready to go. Let's zoom in again. And I'm going to grab my number 6 brush. I want to have a little bit more freedom with my paint. On dry paper, I'm going to start with the raw sienna. I want to load up my brush with the raw sienna. And I want the right hand side of the pudding to be a little bit lighter. I'm going to put that raw sienna on first. I don't have to wash my brush. If I wash my brush, I'm going to add too much water to the mix. I'm going in similar colors, so that brush that's coated in raw sienna, I'm just going to roll it in the burnt sienna, maybe grab a little bit more. I don't need to wash it. And then I'm going to put that on carefully, coming up to the cream very carefully, up to the edge of the raw sienna. I'm going to get a bit more paint on my brush. I don't want to skimp on paint. I want it to be a nice rich looking pudding. I went over the cream a little bit there. Being a little bit too free with my brush, I calm down. The key is to get into the raw sienna before it dries. You don't want dry raw sienna mixing with your wet burnt sienna. You want to have a nice soft mix. A little bit more color on that side. Get your sides nice and even, nice crisp edge. And I'm not going to wash my brush. I'm going to roll it in the dark brown. And while this burnt sienna is still wet, especially want to get under that cream with the dark brown. I want to get around the left-hand edge. Doesn't matter if you get runs and texture, because they're all going to form your raisins and your texture in the pudding. So don't worry about, you know, if you're getting back runs or bits or not, it's not mixing. That's what you're aiming for. You're aiming for that very mottled look. You especially want it dark close to the cream so that the cream looks lovely and bright. And edges and the bottom need to be a little bit darker. Now my raw sienna, the reason I was hurrying was it dried up a bit. So I'm going to grab a little bit more raw sienna on my brush, and I need to just close that up a little bit with some wet paint because it was too starkly dry. As long as I have paint on my brush, like I grabbed raw sienna and just mix that in so it's not too starkly dry. You want your pudding to look nice and dark and rich. And when this is dry, we can go back and we can put a few more raisins in with even darker paint, because it will dry a bit lighter, but this is good for now. I've got the texture going, I've got the burnt sienna showing through the other color. I did go over my cream here, but that will wash off really easily once this is all dry. So I will wash that off with clean water when this is all dry and get that edge nice and crisp again. I think of all of the cards we're doing, the pudding is probably the most painting, what's the word, techniques that you need. You need to be, you know, using some of the really good techniques, wet and wet techniques, to get this look. The others are a bit more straightforward. Let's get my brush from under there. Right, so what we need to do on the mince pies is get the pastry in first with the same colors that we've just used. But what I did for just the top of the lattice work here, I put a little bit of Azo Yellow in here first. You know how you put an egg wash on and sometimes it's a little bit more yellowish? And I just thought that would give it a little bit of highlight there. And of course now my camera's overcompensating. Now I turned down the red. Now it's gone a bit crazy. So, so in addition to the raw sienna and a bit of burnt sienna, you want a little bit of Azo Yellow, and you're going to use Azo Yellow later for the holly as well. So it will be useful to have a little bit mixed up. So I'm just going to mix up a little bit for myself. I don't have any yet. Or if you don't have Azo Yellow, Cadmium Yellow, Hansa Yellow, they're all nice bright yellows. And I need a bit more raw sienna. And a bit more burnt sienna. I've used rather a lot of it actually. Grab a bit more. There, we got that ready. Okay, so let's work on the underneath pie first, so that the underneath part has a little bit of time to dry before we get to the where they touch. It's not that important because we have the black lines, but it is helpful. So the underneath pie, you can just start. It's going to be like the cookie and the gingerbread person, but we're not going to use as much burnt sienna. So we're going to put the raw sienna on first. We'll put the mincemeat on after all this is dry because it's darker, and it won't matter if it piles over the top of the pastry a little bit. I'm using my number 4 brush because I'm doing a larger area and I want to get it on, you know, fairly quickly. Really, because it doesn't need to be that slow. It's just get the paint on. Carefully around the edges, so you have a nice edge. I couldn't decide whether to do 4 mince pies side by side or one on top of the other or 3 on a plate. It was a really difficult choice. And of course you can always go with your own designs if you've got a better idea. I always want to try out everything, but I didn't have time to try out everything. Now I'm going to get a little bit of my number 2 brush, a little bit of burnt sienna. I don't want too much burnt sienna because I want it to be, you know, pastry-like, but I do want a little bit of shading under the pie here, just a little bit, and just a little bit on the top here. Not too much, just You know, we're not going dark like the gingerbread people. Now, I will put a bit of shading on the edges, but not yet because it's a little bit too wet to put any on just yet. I'm just going to get just the tiniest bit on here, maybe just around the edge here. That's enough. You don't want too much, but you're not going really dark, to give it some color. And then when you do the top, the lattice top, I started in the highlights here with a little bit of the Azo Yellow, just sort of up here where it's catching the light, or I think would be catching the light if you'd put an egg wash on it. And I'm not going to wait for the yellow to dry or anything. I'm just going to let it mix with the raw sienna, wet in wet, so that I have both colors, just a bit of highlight there. And you can add more if you feel you want it a bit more yellowy. You can always overemphasize what things look like. You know, if you feel that, I'm just going back with a bit more yellow here. If you feel you want it more yellowy just for a bright look, then do that. Also, it doesn't matter too much if you don't get your lines too straight, because we are going to put the filling in and that will be much darker. So you can straighten it up when you come to do the filling. And I actually put white paint on my filling for make it look glossy after it was all finished and dry. I might try this time leaving a little bit of white space, but we'll see how it goes. Now the same with the burnt sienna. You can add a little bit of burnt sienna at the edges. My pies always catch a little bit at the edges and get a bit darker, thinner there. So I'm just adding wet in wet, a little bit of burnt sienna at those edges there. Got my tiny, tiny little zero brush now. Oh, and I missed a bit of pastry here. And I'm going back to the raw sienna, my zero brush, and I'm going to get the fluting around the edge here. Oh, and I've missed another bit of pastry here. And because we have the black lines on there, you don't even have to be too fussy as you come down under the pie. That's fine. And by now, I think underneath is getting dry enough that I can come up against it and not have any kind of a disaster happening with the paint running. It'll be fine. And underneath the pie, a little bit of burnt sienna in the shadows. And if it's too wet, you can put it on when it's dry, you can put it on later. I'm just adding a tiny bit to the flutes here, you know, where you sort of push your thumb in or whatever, makes a bit of an indent. A little bit of burnt sienna along the edge. And I think this has dried up enough that I can put a little bit of burnt sienna along the edge of this star on the top of the pie here. There we go. And as it's drying, I'm just adding a little bit more burnt sienna definition. As the pastry goes under the other piece of pastry, I'm just adding a little bit of shadow where it goes underneath to make it, you know, sort of look like it undulates a little bit. What we're doing is a very sort of cartoonish sort of a painting, but it doesn't mean to say that we can't add some realistic looking shading or highlights. It just helps to elevate it a little bit beyond cartoon, make it look a little bit more arty. So just those little bits of shadow as it goes under the other piece of pastry. This helps make it look like it's going up and down. And you can use your thirsty brush, like a brush that's clean and dry, a little bit wet, just to soften those edges so it's more rounded. And the bottom pie is drying up, so I can add a little bit of burnt sienna to some of the parts here to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional rather than a flat sort of cartoon. Or illustrative, I guess not cartoonish, but illustrative. You know, like an illustration, like we were talking about in a cookery book or something. It's not meant to look realistic, but it doesn't have to look unrealistic either. A little bit more detail. We don't need tons and tons of detail. It's just that little bit more. And as this is drying, I'm just adding just a little bit more shadow at the bottom, but mostly raw sienna. Keep it light. Okay, so I'll put them side by side, and I'll pull back just a little bit so you can see them side by side, and then you can continue to work on your pastry. And you have them there. Right, so there's not much to do on this little guy, and if you just want to leave his hat white, that's okay, but I always like to put just a little bit of shadow on the white, and I'm going to use, you can either use a cerulean blue, which is really nice for shadows, or you can use a cobalt blue, which is also really nice for shadows. That's that one. But you can see how light I've got them. Just the tiniest bit of clean water and just a little bit of pigment. You don't want much. I'm going to use my number 4 brush. And for this one, I'm going to use the cerulean. It doesn't matter, cobalt or cerulean, they both look lovely. And I'm just going to put a little bit of shading, and I'm going to make it sort of bobbly, you know, like that's icing or cotton wool. And same, just on one side, little bit of shading, wetting my brush so that it's not too bright. I'm just checking my other guy that I did. Yeah, just a little bit, certainly on the underneath here, and under here, and just a little bit, not much. You don't want to fill it all in, the edges are important to have just a little bit of shading on each edge here, and leave the center nice and white. So it's really, really subtle, really subtle. And now I'm using a combination of cobalt and cerulean. So either one works really well. You don't need much. It's just a tiny bit. I do think I would rather have the mouth red, so I'm going to use my zero brush while I've got this here and everything else is dry. And of course, like we said earlier, you could use a gel pen because this is a very thin line, so a gel pen would work fine. I think I just want to put that in red and kind of like that better. So that's all you need to do. If you did the one with the candy cane, let's grab the one I did with the candy cane before. What I do on both candy canes, the one that's in the hot chocolate and the one that he's holding, is the inside edge. I use Cobalt Blue for this, definitely. On the inside edge, I just put a little bit of Cobalt Blue shadow, just a tiny bit. Again, it makes it more three-dimensional. If you want, you can put a little bit on the icing around the buttons. Not that necessary. But definitely the candy canes look a little bit more three-dimensional if you have a tiny bit of Cobalt Blue on the inside. The other place we have a candy cane, of course, is in the hot chocolate. And grab some of that blue and you can just do one side. And we will go on to the hot chocolate too. I don't think I need to leave this guy there for very long because that was a very, very simple step. Just putting in a little bit of Cobalt Blue or Cerulean Blue shadow, just a tiny bit. Those little tiny details just help make it look a little bit more realistic. Now for the cup of cocoa, it's going to be a little bit different. I'm looking for my cup of cocoa. Because we do have a bit of shading around the marshmallows and the cup, and that's a combination of colors, a gray and some raw sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of gray on here, but we need to do the cup first. I used a color that I love and I'm lucky enough to have, which is Cobalt Teal. Now you may not have that color, so don't despair. I'm going to show you what my Cobalt Teal looks like. It's a color that you simply can't mix. It's one of those like primary colors made from chemicals that you can't mix a blue and a yellow and get this color. It's just one of those colors you need to buy. But a very close color to it is Cerulean Blue. And I'll just take it down a notch with a bit of water. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of yellow to the Cerulean Blue. And that gets a little bit closer to the Cobalt Teal, but I just love the Cobalt Teal. It's such a pretty color. So either one, whichever you have. If you've got a Cerulean Blue, then that's a lovely color to use. It will look just as gorgeous. And what I want to do first, I want to use my number 6 brush. I want to get the paint on fairly quickly. I want it to be quite light, sort of around here. So I'm going to put some water there. That's going to lighten that area and make it almost white. And then I'm going to grab on my number 6 brush, my Cerulean, not my Cerulean Blue, my Cobalt Teal, but you can use your Cerulean Blue. And I'm going to start over on the left, putting strong paint on the left, going very carefully around the cookie. And then when I come up to the water, I'm just going to let it, let the paint bleed into the water. So that in that space here, where I wet it, it's going to be, where's my cloth? Here it is. It's going to be lighter. As I come down here behind the marshmallows, want it a little bit darker on the handle. And I'm washing, drying my brush. I'm going to use my dry, thirsty brush to just soften that all in so that I get a good soft edge to that highlight. And under the, I'm going to put a little bit more color. I'm grabbing a little bit more color, a bit more teal color. And just want it a little stronger under the cream, because it will make the cream look a little bit brighter. The color's a little bit stronger there. I am going to do a little bit of shadow behind the cookie later. Now I want to go to a much smaller brush for the handle, because this brush is too big. Try my number 2, because I don't want to make too much of a mess of the handle. And I also want to have, again, a highlight on the handle. So as I come around the edge here, I want to leave a white highlight. That means I've got to paint very, very carefully with my point of my brush and leave that white highlight along the edge of that handle there. Now I have some Cobalt Blue mixed with a little bit of the yellow. And I'm going to see if this is, yeah, this is wet enough to put a little bit of that Cobalt Blue for the shadow just on this side. As that will darken up the teal a little bit and behind the cookie. And so the Cobalt Blue is a slightly warmer, slightly darker, and I'm just putting that on that side, just give a little bit of shadow on the left, a little bit more. Adding a little bit of color while it's still wet behind the cookie. And because the rest of the paint is still wet, it will blend in. I can always help it with a clean, thirsty brush. But what I want is this nice light area here for reflecting the light, make everything look light in the painting. Now I can't put the shadow on while that's all wet because it will all bleed up into the cup and so forth. So we need to work on something else and do all the shadows at the very, very last minute. So that needs to dry first. That was a good reason to do that now. We don't have any holly on this one, so we will work on the holly on the other 2 after you've done your mug. And remember, cerulean blue is a lovely blue as well for your mug, or your choice. If you want to do a green mug or a red mug or whatever color mug for your Christmas card. But wet and wet with the paint. And you're going to need your yellow, and you either need to mix a green or just use a sap green. If you have a sap green, you can mix a green with ultramarine blue and yellow. So either either just, you'll need some bright yellow for one part, and then you'll either need a mix or some sap green. So if you do ultramarine blue with some bright yellow, you'll get a nice dark green. If you want to put a little bit of phthalo green in it, that's okay, because holly is quite an intense green. So I'm putting a little bit of phthalo green, a little bit more ultramarine in with it. If you prefer to use the sap green, which is just a tube green, you can. I would, for holly, I would add a little bit of ultramarine blue to the sap, or even phthalo green, just to make it a bit more intense. So you do what you are able to do with your paints, and you put so you're going to put the bright yellow on first, not too wet. We are going wet and wet, but not too wet. So I'm putting the yellow on first on the part that's sort of sticking up, the highlight. And then I'm taking the dark green and putting that on the other side and just letting the two bleed together, wet and wet. Particularly you want to go behind the red with the darker green so that the red shows up. And then if they're not mixing well, use your thirsty brush to just get them together in the center there, so that you see some yellow, some dark green. And you're going to do the same for each holly leaf. I'm getting a bit of green in my yellow now because I'm not cleaning my brush properly, but that's fine. I want to go carefully behind the berries. Have one side that's fairly dark. And I'm just wiping my brush on my towel to dry it off a little bit, and I'm just pushing those two colors together. You might want a little bit more, just tapping a little bit more dark green in. Wash my brush a bit better this time. Now you might say, why don't you do all the yellow first? Well, it'll be dry before you can get the wet in wet happening. So if you do it all first and you come back, your yellow's all going to be dry and you won't get a nice blending of the two colors. I'm going to add a little bit more blue and phthalo green to that. Holly is the one time you can use quite a bit of phthalo green. Most plants don't have a lot of phthalo green in them, but holly does. So again, I'm washing my brush, giving it a good dry on the cloth, and just sucking those two colors together just gently. Now, of course, the first one's drying up quite a lot lighter, so I want it a bit darker. I'm going to put a little bit more blue and phthalo in with that, and I'm going to darken one side a little bit more. A bit too light. Add a bit more color. Again, wash my brush, dry it on a towel, and just soften those in. And the other thing we need on our pudding is a little bit more dark. So I'm going to use, I had that burnt sienna and ultramarine, and make it a little bit more dark, add a bit more ultramarine. Or you can use burnt umber, or you can use sepia. Sepia is a good dark brown. And with that darker brown, I'm going to just add some raisins with these little curly brush strokes. And if your pudding isn't dark enough, you can add a bit more dark if you need a bit more dark on your pudding. If you need it to be a stronger brown, you can add a bit more now. Blend that in. You do that before you do the raisins, actually. I can come back in a bit and do a few more raisins. You don't want lots and lots of raisins, just, mostly on the dark side, on the left-hand side, which I'm making my dark side of the pudding. And then the other side's more sort of in the light. You can do a little bit of detail, but keep it on one side. It makes your pudding look nice and round. Oh, the other thing I haven't done on this one, just thought about it. Same as with the icing on the gingerbread people. I'm getting that very, very light blue wash. My number 4 brush, so not too small a brush for the wash. And you can just put a little bit of blue just sort of on the edges of the cream or the icing. Be careful it doesn't you don't want it to touch the green and you don't want it to touch the brown. I'm being careful not to let that happen, or I'm going to get a whole bunch of bleeding into the white, get a mess there. But you can pop a little bit of shading maybe around the berries. And where's my other pudding gone? Let's find my other one. Here it is. I'm going to do a little bit of shading underneath, but I want that brown that I just put on to dry a little bit first. I don't want to make too much of a mess with the wet in wet. Because we're gonna do the same thing for the holly on the mince pies. We're gonna do the holly the same way, so same technique. We're going to put a little bit of yellow on the upper side, facing upwards. Then you're going to get your dark green and put that on the lower side. And then just dry your brush off a little bit and use your dry brush to just make sure those two blend together okay. Grab a little bit more yellow. Do this one. Having the two colours, the yellow and the green, just gives your holly more life. Always having highlights and light and dark gives everything more just interest. It's not so flat. And then last one here. And the dark green. And I'm going to use the dark green to make those little sort of divots in these berries. The green on the red will go lovely and dark. They're complementary, so I'm going to add a little bit more dark green in here. And then we need the fir branches. And we're going to use same sort of green, same sort of dark green that we've got here. We can mix it with the yellow. Fir is quite a blue green, so we can always add a little bit of ultramarine to it. And you see on my palette here, I've got this green, which was, I'll mix it again for you. It was yellow and ultramarine blue. Make a nice dark green with that. Add a little bit of phthalo green. And you've got a nice sort of Christmassy green there. I'm going to grab a little bit more yellow. And you can use a thin brush, or you can use your rigger brush. Your, what you call that, the script liner, rigger. Make sure I've got mine here. Grab it. So I have a couple. There's a thicker one and a thinner one. This is the 2/0 thinner, and this is the 2. I'm going to do the stems with the 2, and the rest with the thinner one. So I'm going to pull the stems down with the number 2 rigger. And I haven't drawn in any of the fir needles, because I just want to do them with paint, really. And then I'm going to switch to the thinner one, the thinner brush. I'm going to grab yellow and green on my thinner brush. And then we're going to flick this brush. I'm going to flick it gently outwards from the stem. I'm just using the tip. And as you come to the end, of course, you've got to get the shape of the end here using your brush strokes, you might have to turn your paper because it's easier to sort of flick towards yourself. And what makes it look even more realistic is if you have a bit of a break here and there, and sometimes a little bit of a change of direction. So I made it just a little break in here. And the other thing that helps is I'm going to get the other brush and a little bit of the green and blue on my brush. I'm just going to connect some of these with a little bit of watery paint so that I don't have to, it's not all just, you know, sticky thin lines. You've got some variety. Grab some more on this brush. I'm going to do this one. And don't forget to, you know, once you get a rhythm going, take a break and don't have them all too evenly spaced. Otherwise it just looks too regular, which is not how things are in real life. And you can connect some with a bit of paint. And then the last one. Gentle touch with your brush. Getting a little bit thinner as you come to the tip. Make the tip with these brush strokes. I'm having to turn my page so that I can sort of pull my brush towards me. If you've got a gap here, don't repeat the same gap on the other side. Have it in have in a different spot. Don't have lots of gaps. Just have one or two. Some of them can cross over. And then I'm going to get a little bit of wet paint on my brush. And it's going to close up some of these with a little bit of a wash. Grab a little bit of yellow. And again, don't do too much. It's all about just a little bit. Just a little bit, never too much of anything. One of these branches can be a little bit of the dark brown. I'm grabbing the dark brown, putting this little branch in here. Maybe a bit of dark brown in here. I just put a little bit of the dark brown in the stems, a little bit of dark brown there. And of course that's going to be reflected in the filling of the pie too. And the other thing I can do, if I want even more three-dimensional things happening, I can put that alizarin crimson on the berries. Give them a little bit of three-dimensional colour. So the ones that are sort of behind the others. Another colour that's really good for shadow on red, I'm grabbing the green and I'm just going to put green on this one here. So I've just grabbed the green that I used for the holly and I've just put a little bit over the red. Green over red will give you a lovely, lovely dark shadow, but it will still read as red. Same thing I'm going to grab red now on my brush. If you put red over green, you can similarly have a good shadow that looks very natural. I'm just going to put a little bit of red over the green here. Just grabbing red on my brush, and I'll put a little bit here too. I'm going to wet it in with a wet brush. Using your complementary colours for shadow is such a great way to paint. And you can see already the extra life it gives to, extra depth and extra life it gives to just that little bit of sort of cartoonish painting. And because we are really running out of time, I'm going to move ahead with the pie filling, which is all the colours we've been using. I'm going to get some burnt sienna, and then I'm going to also get some burnt sienna with ultramarine blue. I've put them in the wrong place. So burnt sienna over here is burnt sienna for the first bit, and then while that's wet, I'm going to mix burnt sienna and ultramarine blue for the dark part of the pie. Or you can use one of your dark browns, that's okay. And a little brush. I'm going to start at the top, otherwise I'm going to get my hand in it. I'm going to grab my number 2 brush. Start with the burnt sienna. I am this time, last time I put the highlights in with white paint. This time I'm going to try and be a bit more disciplined, and I'm going to leave the highlights with white paper. I've missed a bit of pastry there, and we'll come back and fix that. So the highlights are because the mincemeat in the pie is shiny. It's you know, it's glistening. It's got all that sugar in the mix that makes it quite shiny. Some of it I'm not going to leave white because it's too close to the edge, and we don't need everything overpowering our senses, but that little piece of pastry will have to be done later with some raw sienna. I missed it out. The thing with the white highlights is to make them curvy, because they are supposed to be sort of raisins and stuff, so you don't want to make them straight. I've put some curvy lines in there with pen, which helps me. Now I'm going all over with the burnt sienna, but I am going to put the darker brown on when this is starting to dry a little bit. If I put it on now, it's just going to flood everything because my paint's quite wet and I don't want to flood everything out with the 2 colours. But you know that mincemeat is quite dark, so this burnt sienna is going to be sort of the highlights. And this is my number 2 brush. 2 so that I've got a good amount of paint on, but I can really get the detail in with the point of the brush. I've gone quiet because I'm really concentrating on getting that paint in without making too much of a mess. All my pastry. I'm rushing a little bit now. And I'm putting just a little bit more detail on the pastry edge too. Doesn't it start to look yummy once you get the filling in? Nice and shiny and glistening. So now I've got the burnt sienna, and I'm going to switch to my 0 brush, and I'm just going to touch the corners, the left-hand corners, with the dark. It's still a little bit too wet because I work with quite wet paint, so if I'm sort of touching all the left-hand corners with the darker paint and letting it flood into the burnt sienna. And I can come back and put a little bit more detail on later. I'll just pop that 0 brush over there, and I'm going to need to mix myself up a little bit more burnt sienna. And I want to do the pie underneath. So the pie underneath is a little easier because we don't have to go in between all of the little lattice work, but we do, if you can, if you've managed to get control of your paint and your brush, you can add the little highlights as you go. If you find that too difficult, put them in later with some white paint or a white gel pen. That's, that's allowed. If you do leave white highlights, make them kind of rounded. And if you find that too tricky, just draw, like I've got a few little rounded pen shapes. You can draw them in with pen or with pencil just to help you with the shapes. And I'm just going to do a little bit more detail on the edge of the pies here and there. And maybe even do a little bit more on the lower pie. A little bit more shading, just a tiny bit. With my wet brush to pull that round. Oh, I missed a bit of pie over here. Look at that. There. Now I'm going to take that dark mix again. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it to really darken it up. And just put some dark shading in. Be careful not to put your dark shading over your white highlights. It should mix wet in wet. If it doesn't, that's okay. Just try and make rounded shapes, because what you're trying to make shapes of is raisins. What was I wanting? I don't know. Yeah, you're trying to make raisin shapes. Oh, I was going to go into a little bit. Get my 0 brush, and this is drying up here a little bit, so I maybe want to go in and put a few more little round raisin shapes here. It's still quite wet. That's good enough. So your burnt sienna and your dark brown and your white, they make a lovely sort of glistening filling for your mince pies. Now for the shading, I know you're probably doing that, but I've got to just say, I've done a little bit of cobalt blue and a little bit of the green from the leaves really quickly. I'm going to grab my number 6 brush, or number 8 is fine, and a little bit of cobalt blue. Doesn't need to be too strong. It's going to be a very quick wash, and we're going to come under the pie, out to the side. I'm going to grab a little bit of green on my brush, mix it in with the blue, and then I'm going to grab just water on my brush. Can you hear me getting nice clean water on the brush? And I'm going to dilute out the edges of all of that with some water. I'm going to just shove my brush sort of like that, and grab a little bit of blue, put it here. It's really, really subtle. We're not painting a ton of background color in there. Just a little bit of shading. Why the green here? Because we've got a lot of green over here, and it balances the picture, that's all. I might want to take a little bit more green right up to the tape there, because this green goes nearly to the tape and it just gives it a little bit of balance. But I'll show you my dilution. This is the dilution of my cobalt blue. Look, it's nearly water. So you don't want thick blue on there. It's just a tiny, tiny bit to make a little bit of shadow. It's a complementary color to your raw sienna, so it works just great with it. And I have missed a little bit of raw sienna over here. I can just pop that in. Missed a little bit of pastry there. And pop that in. So we just have one more. Well, actually, the pudding has the same technique. I want to look at the picture of my pudding to make sure that I'm doing it. Yep. So same technique, that cobalt blue. It has to be quick and no fussing. You're going to just get your watery cobalt blue and put it under your pudding. Wet brush, just spread it out a little bit. And I'm going to get a little tiny bit of burnt sienna, just a tiny bit. And I'm just going to add that to the edge of the cobalt blue. Why? Because shadows always reflect light off of the thing that they are shadowing, and it just unifies your painting a little bit. I'm going to take the tape off of this one because I want you to see that those little bits at the corner come up nice and straight, because they had tape there, so it makes the little border bits, the little corner bits, nice and straight where the corners are. And of course, I have put all of mine on a red card background. But you can do green if you wanted. You could do brown if you wanted. You could do like a Christmas. The dollar stores right now have lots of Christmas design paper in there, so that's an option. Now I know I'm rushing ahead a bit, but we really are running very much out of time. So we've got one more that we've got to do some shading for, and very similar. We've got to get a little bit of shading behind the marshmallows and under the cup. I want a grey, so into that cobalt blue, let's bring it back a bit. Into this cobalt blue, I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to make it grey. Not much, just a little bit to make it more grey. And again, my number 6 or even your number 8 brush. quite a wet brush because I want to make sure I spread this out quite watery. I'm going to just get water on my brush now. It's water to spread that out a little bit behind the marshmallows. Grab a little bit more color. Blue behind the cookie because it's complementary. Spread it out a little bit. Now water on my brush. Spread it out. I can take a little bit of that Cobalt Teal. Remember, it reflects the color of the cup. Now just water on my brush now. I'm going to add a little bit more shading behind these marshmallows. Water on my brush to spread it out. And just spread it out here a little bit. Mostly to make the cookie show up because the gray behind it will make it show up a little bit. I can also take a little bit of that raw sienna. I can add a little bit of that raw sienna to the shadow too. If I want to take a tiny, tiny bit of that gray, tiny little bit, I can also add a little bit of gray shadow to the marshmallow. A tiny, tiny bit. Has to be really subtle. And if you think there's not enough under the cup, grab a little bit more and just pop a little bit more in while that paint is wet, and it will just diffuse into what you've got there and stop your cup look like it's floating. And it's not going to be the same color as the cup, so it will give it a shadow, but I have put a little bit of that Cobalt Teal here, a little bit of that raw sienna here, and the marshmallows stand out because we've got some gray behind them. And I might even just add a little bit more. So we've got the gray on the, sorry to rush, but we've got the shadow on the pie. We have the shadow under the pudding. And I'll just quickly talk about how I mount these very, very quickly. I was showing Carrie earlier that I buy cards from Michael's in big packs. You can get a pack of 50 cards and envelopes from Michael's for, I think they're $15.99. You just fold them yourself. So these ones were 5.5 by 5.5. And I bought a pack of 50 square ones. And I've made sure that these fit on. If you cut your red 5.25 by 5.25, it fits with just a nice little border around your card. And then of course this I made 4.5 by 4.5. Now I don't like using wet glue because it makes all of the paper bubble up. So what I use is that's last year's one, is this tape from Dollar Tree. It's double-sided tape, so you put, I don't know if it's $1.25 still at the Dollar Tree or if they put their prices up, but it's nice dry glue, easy to mount. I put it on all 4 sides. I make sure I burnish it down with a folding tool. And I have a rule that I always take the bottom tape off only to start with. So I always know that the bottom is sticky. That way I can line up the other 3 sides and get them nice and even. You can measure it if you want to. And then I stick the bottom down once I've got the other 3 sides lined up. And then I remove the wax paper backing from the other sides. It's a nice economical tape because you get a great big roll. Dollar Tree is the only place I've ever found it. I can't find it at Dollarama or anywhere else. So I can just press that down and that's all nicely glued down. No wet glue, no fuss. And then I do the same thing and I glue it to here. And for the inside, you can stamp the inside with Merry Christmas. And for some of the corners, I have this little pot of little red hearts, and on the little gingerbread guys, I put these little red hearts in the corner. You do have to glue those down with some wet glue, but this pot's full of all different size little red hearts. I got red jewels, red and green and silver jewels. A lot of dollar stores you can buy these ready glued ones on a card. So there's all kinds of ideas if you wanted to put on this one. I put those little hearts on the corners. I liked those better than my little paintings on the corners.
Yeah, I do too.
So, yeah, so I mean, you can almost any dollar store you go to will have a pack of something like this that you can stick on the corners. And then these ones you get from places like Michael's and craft stores. There's probably, I don't know, 1,000 little hearts in there. This little tool is nice. It's a little pick, and you can pick them up with this little sticky pick. And if there's glue on there, it will put them down too. So that's how I finish them off.
Pretty cool.
And there we go. So I hope you all enjoyed doing your Christmas cards, and you may have to finish them off without me because I know we had to rush at the last post there, but thanks for joining me again.